Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Earth's dawn, staring at the holographic message that had just changed everything. The tall, graceful alien figure spoke with a voice like flowing water, her crystalline features shifting with gentle light as she delivered humanity's first invitation to join the galaxy. "People of Earth," the alien said, "I am Ambassador Zelthera of the Vexian Council. For many years we have watched your world with great interest. Your species has reached the point where you are ready to join our peaceful alliance of 12 worlds." Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Communications Officer Ben Parker was recording everything, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the equipment. Dr. Kevin Roberts, their science officer, leaned forward with wide eyes, already taking notes about the aliens' technology. The hologram was so perfect it seemed like Zelthara was actually standing in their ship. "We call ourselves the Galactic Confederation," Zelthara continued. "For 800 years we have lived without war, without weapons, without violence of any kind. We have cured disease, ended hunger, and achieved harmony among all our peoples. We offer these gifts to humanity." The message went on to describe wonders that seemed too good to believe. Cities that floated in the clouds, ships that could cross the galaxy in days, medicine that could make people live forever. All of this would be shared freely with Earth, but there was one condition. To join our alliance, you must embrace the path of absolute peace. All weapons must be destroyed. All thoughts of violence must be put aside. This is the price of paradise, and we believe humanity is ready to pay it. Jake felt his heart racing as the message ended. He immediately ordered a return course to Earth. This was too important for a ship captain to decide alone. 3 weeks later, Jake sat in a conference room in Geneva, watching the most important meeting in human history. President Helen Walsh had called together every world leader, along with Earth's best scientists and military commanders. Admiral Ryan Carter, head of Earth's Deep Space Command, was speaking. "The benefits are obvious," he said, gesturing to a wall covered with images from the alien message. "Clean energy that never runs out. Medical technology that could save millions of lives. Space travel that would let us explore the entire galaxy." Dr. Susan Moore, Earth's leading expert on human behavior, raised her hand. "What about the cost? They want us to give up all weapons, all military forces. What if this is a trick?" The room erupted in arguments. Some people thought Dr. Moore was being too careful. Others worried she might be right. Jake found himself thinking about his own grandfather, who had fought in the last World War 60 years ago. What would the old soldier think about giving up humanity's ability to defend itself? Commander Lisa Blake, who had spent years studying the alien signals, stood up. "I've analyzed every transmission we've received," she said. "There's no sign of deception. These beings seem genuinely peaceful. Their technology is so advanced they could have conquered us easily if that was their goal." President Walsh called for a vote. One by one, the world's leaders agreed. The benefits were too great to ignore. Humanity would accept the invitation and take its place among the stars as a peaceful species. 2 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of a new ship called New Horizon. Unlike Earth's Dawn, which had been built for exploration and carried defensive weapons, this ship was designed purely for diplomacy. Its cargo holds were filled with art, music, books, and gifts representing the best of human culture. Ambassador Patricia Stone joined Jake on the bridge as they prepared to leave Earth's orbit. She was a skilled diplomat who had helped negotiate peace between nations on Earth. Now she would represent all of humanity to an alien confederation. "Are you ready for this, Captain?" she asked. Jake looked out at the stars ahead. Somewhere out there was Zentara Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Confederation. In just a few weeks he would walk on an alien world and meet beings from across the galaxy. "I think so," he said, "though I have to admit I'm nervous about the weapons requirement. Earth's military leaders weren't happy about scrapping all our defenses." Patricia nodded. "I understand their concerns, but think about what we're gaining. No more war. No more hunger. No more death from old age. It's worth the risk." Lieutenant Colonel Amy Turner, their security chief, joined them at the observation window. She was one of Earth's best soldiers, but her job on this mission was to protect the diplomatic team, not to fight battles. "The crew is ready, Captain," she reported, "though I have to say it feels strange traveling to meet aliens without any real defenses." "We have defenses," Patricia said. "We have our humanity, our culture, our ability to learn and adapt. Those are the real strengths of our species." Jake nodded. though he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He had read the reports about how peaceful the Confederation was, how they had solved all the problems that still plagued Earth. But something in his gut told him to be careful. Dr. Kevin Roberts appeared on the bridge, practically bouncing with excitement. "Captain, I've been going over the technical data they sent us. The things they can do with energy and matter are incredible. We're going to learn so much." As New Horizon accelerated toward the stars, Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He was carrying humanity's hopes and dreams to the galaxy. Everyone on Earth was counting on this mission to secure a better future for the human race. But late at night, when he was alone in his quarters, Jake sometimes wondered if they were making the right choice. Humanity had survived for thousands of years by being tough, by fighting when necessary, by never backing down from a challenge. Now they were voluntarily giving up the very traits that had made them strong. He pushed these doubts aside. The aliens had shown nothing but kindness and generosity. Their technology could solve every problem Earth faced. This was humanity's chance to join something greater than themselves. As the ship flew deeper into space, heading toward their first meeting with alien civilization, Jake Morrison didn't know that he was leading humanity into the greatest trap in galactic history. The peaceful paradise they had been promised was real, but it came with a price far higher than anyone on Earth had imagined. The city of Zentara Prime was the most beautiful thing Jake Morrison had ever seen. Crystal towers reached into the purple sky, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solid light. Flying vehicles moved silently through the air, following patterns too complex for human minds to understand. "Welcome to our world," Ambassador Zelthara said as she guided the human delegation through the spaceport. She was even more impressive in person, standing nearly 8 feet tall with skin that looked like polished silver. When she spoke, her voice had a musical quality that made everyone want to listen. Dr. Kevin Roberts couldn't stop taking pictures and measurements. "The energy readings are off the charts," he whispered to Jake. "They're using power sources we can't even identify." The humans were given rooms in a building that grew from the ground like a tree but was clearly artificial. Their windows looked out over a city where millions of beings from 12 different species lived and worked together in perfect harmony. Ambassador, Patricia Stone spent her first week in formal meetings with the Council of Species. Each alien race was more amazing than the last. The Tytheri looked like walking flowers and could communicate through scent. The Morven had 4 arms and could perform calculations that would challenge Earth's best computers. The Zentarans were artists who could shape matter with their thoughts. "It's incredible," Patricia told Jake during one of their evening briefings. "They've solved every social problem we can imagine. No crime, no poverty, no conflict of any kind. Everyone works together for the common good." But Lieutenant Colonel Amy Turner was bothered by things the others didn't notice. During a tour of the city's gardens, she saw a group of young aliens playing a game. When she clapped her hands to get their attention, they all froze and looked terrified. It took several minutes for their caretaker to calm them down. "They act like they've never heard a loud noise before," Amy told Jake privately. "And did you notice how the adults react when we talk about Earth's history? The moment we mention any kind of conflict, even ancient wars, they change the subject." Communications Officer Ben Parker was having his own concerns. He had been trying to establish a direct communication link with Earth, but all their messages had to go through the Confederation's network. When he asked about setting up an independent channel, the alien seemed confused by the request. "Why would you need a private channel?" Zelthara had asked. "All communication in the Confederation is open and shared. Privacy leads to secrets, and secrets lead to conflict." The breakthrough came during the 3rd week when Dr. Roberts was given access to the Great Library, a massive crystal structure that contained the history of all 12 species. He was supposed to be learning about peaceful technologies, but his scientific curiosity led him to explore older sections of the database, hidden deep in the archives, protected by security systems that had been forgotten for centuries. Roberts found files that made his blood run cold. The records told a very different story about the Confederation's peaceful history. 800 years ago, the galaxy had been at war. Not just small conflicts between neighboring worlds, but a massive struggle that involved dozens of species fighting for survival. The records spoke of the hegemony, a race of beings that had developed weapons beyond imagination and tactics that could break the will of entire civilizations. Roberts worked through the night, translating ancient files with the help of Michelle Davis, a cryptographer who had been sent along to handle secure communications. What they found changed everything. The Great Accord that had brought peace to the galaxy was not a treaty between equals. It was a surrender document. Species after species had been systematically conquered by the hegemony, not through direct military action, but through psychological warfare that was more effective than any weapon. They didn't just defeat these civilizations, Michelle whispered as they read through the files. They broke them completely, made them grateful to give up their freedom. The files described techniques that were terrifying in their sophistication. The hegemony would first make contact with a species, offering gifts of advanced technology and medical treatments. Once the target species became dependent on these gifts, the hegemony would begin introducing subtle changes to their biology and psychology. Chemical agents in the air and water would gradually reduce aggressive impulses. Educational programs would teach children that violence was always wrong, even in self-defense. Cultural exchanges would slowly replace native traditions with hegemony values of absolute obedience, disguised as peace. Within a few generations, proud warrior races would become docile servants who genuinely believed they had chosen the path of peace. They would thank their conquerors for freeing them from the burden of having to make difficult decisions or defend themselves. Roberts realized with growing horror that the 12 species of the Confederation were not allies of the hegemony. They were its victims, so thoroughly conquered that they had forgotten they were slaves. The next morning, Roberts met secretly with Jake and the other senior crew members in their quarters. He shared what he had learned, watching their faces change from disbelief to understanding to fear. "The medical treatments they've been offering us," Roberts said, showing them chemical formulas from the ancient files. "They're the same compounds the hegemony used on other species. They're designed to make us passive and dependent." Amy Turner slammed her fist on the table. "I knew something was wrong. These people aren't peaceful by choice. They've been programmed to be peaceful." Ben Parker looked sick. "All our communications with Earth have been going through their systems. They could be editing our messages, making it look like everything is fine." Patricia Stone stared at the evidence, her diplomatic training warring with the horrible truth in front of her. "If this is real, then Earth is walking into the same trap. Our people are already starting to implement the Confederation's recommendations for social harmony." Jake felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. He was supposed to be humanity's ambassador to a peaceful galaxy, but instead he had discovered that they were surrounded by the victims of the most successful conquest in galactic history. "What do we do?" he asked. "We can't fight them. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, and if we try to warn Earth, they'll know we've discovered the truth." Roberts pulled up more files on his portable computer. According to these records, every species that tried to resist was destroyed completely. The hegemony doesn't just defeat its enemies, it erases them from history. The humans sat in silence, realizing they were trapped on an alien world, surrounded by beings who had been psychologically conditioned to serve their conquerors. Their ship was unarmed, their crew was small, and they were light years from any help. But as Jake looked at his team, he saw something that gave him hope. These were humans. They came from a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have broken other civilizations. They had never learned how to give up. "We're going to find a way to fight back," he said quietly. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to find a way. Because if we don't, Earth is next." Outside their window, the beautiful city of Zentara Prime continued its peaceful existence, its inhabitants unaware that deep in their archives, the seeds of rebellion had just been planted by a species the hegemony had never encountered before. A species that turned everything into a weapon, including hope itself. Jake Morrison knew they had to be extremely careful. The hegemony had been perfecting their control techniques for 8 centuries. One wrong move would expose the humans and doom Earth to the same fate as the other species. The crew split into small groups to avoid suspicion. They continued their official duties, attending meetings and cultural exchanges while secretly gathering information about their captors. Jake and Ambassador Patricia Stone maintained diplomatic contact with the Council, smiling and expressing gratitude while learning how the control system worked. Dr. Kevin Roberts made a disturbing discovery during his study of the Confederation's medical technology. The treatments offered to humanity weren't just advanced medicine. They contained biological agents designed to alter brain chemistry in specific ways. The compounds target neural pathways associated with aggression and independent thinking, Roberts explained during a secret meeting in Jake's quarters. But here's the interesting part. Human brain structure is different from the other species. Our neural networks are more complex with multiple backup pathways. Michelle Davis had been working with Roberts to analyze the psychological profiles the hegemony had compiled on humanity. They based their human pacification program on studying the other conquered species, she said. But they made a critical error. They assume all intelligent life develops the same way. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Turner leaned forward. What kind of difference are we talking about? Roberts pulled up brain scans on his portable computer. Every other species in the galaxy evolved as either pure predators or pure prey animals. They developed either aggression or cooperation, but not both. Humans evolved as persistence hunters who also lived in complex social groups. We're wired for both violence and cooperation at the same time. This explained something that had been bothering Amy since their arrival. The aliens couldn't understand human entertainment. They were horrified by Earth's action movies, confused by competitive sports, and completely baffled by human games that involved conflict or competition. Communications Officer Ben Parker had been carefully monitoring the Confederation's internal networks. He discovered that all communication between worlds was controlled by a central artificial intelligence that filtered every message. But the system had blind spots. The AI is designed to detect and block military communications, Ben explained, but it doesn't recognize human cultural references as potential code. We could hide messages in songs, stories, even jokes. The breakthrough came when Amy started talking to the young aliens in the city. Unlike the adults, who seemed completely programmed, the children still showed traces of their species' original personalities. A young Zentaran named Crix was fascinated by Amy's stories about human children playing war games. We used to play fighting games too, Crix whispered during one of their meetings. My grandmother told me stories before the peacekeepers made her stop. She said our people once built great machines and flew between the stars to explore new worlds. Amy realized that the memories of freedom were still buried in the conquered species, hidden beneath layers of conditioning. The hegemony hadn't completely erased their victims' original nature. They had just buried it so deep that most individuals never accessed those memories. Dr. Roberts began studying the biological agents more carefully. He discovered that while the compounds affected human behavior, they couldn't completely eliminate the neural structures that made humans adaptable. The chemicals made humans more peaceful, but they couldn't remove humanity's ability to think creatively or solve problems. It's like putting a blanket over a fire, Roberts explained. The fire is still there, just hidden. And if we can find a way to remove the blanket... Patricia Stone had been attending council meetings where she learned about Project Integration, the hegemony's plan for bringing humanity into their system. The timeline was aggressive. Earth would begin receiving medical aid within 6 months, with full integration scheduled for completion within 5 years. The plan was terrifyingly detailed. Human children would attend special schools where they would learn Confederation values. Adults would receive regular medical treatments that would gradually alter their brain chemistry. Human culture would be slowly replaced with approved alternatives that promoted absolute obedience. They're not planning to destroy humanity, Patricia reported. They want to keep us alive as another servant species. But the humans they create won't really be human anymore. Jake felt a cold anger building inside him as he listened to these reports. The hegemony had turned conquest into a science, perfecting techniques that let them steal entire civilizations without their victims even realizing they were being enslaved. But the humans had advantages that previous species hadn't possessed. They came from a world where survival had required constant adaptation. Human history was full of situations where small groups had overcome overwhelming odds through creativity and determination. Michelle Davis suggested their first real act of rebellion. What if we start telling stories, she said. Not obviously subversive ones, but tales that might trigger suppressed memories in the other species. Amy loved the idea. She began sharing human myths and legends with the aliens she met. Stories about heroes who stood against impossible odds. Tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when their freedom was threatened. Legends about the importance of making your own choices. The aliens were fascinated by these stories, though they claimed to find them disturbing. Several Confederation citizens began seeking out Amy to hear more tales about humans who refused to surrender. even when defeat seemed certain. Dr. Roberts started a more subtle campaign. During his technology exchanges, he would casually mention scientific principles that the hegemony had suppressed. He spoke about the importance of questioning authority, the value of independent research, and the dangers of accepting any truth without investigation. Ben Parker began introducing human music to the communication networks. He claimed he was sharing Earth's cultural heritage, but the songs he chose carried messages about freedom, resistance, and the right to determine your own destiny. The music spread through the Confederation faster than anyone expected. Jake watched these small acts of rebellion with growing hope. The humans weren't trying to start a war or overthrow the hegemony directly. Instead, they were doing something much more dangerous to a system based on psychological control. They were asking questions and encouraging others to do the same. The first sign that their plan was working came when Crix approached Amy with a forbidden question. "What does it feel like to choose your own path?" the young Zentaran asked. "My grandmother's stories made me wonder what it would be like to decide things for myself." Amy smiled, realizing that the most human trait of all was starting to spread through the Confederation. Curiosity about freedom was beginning to wake up in minds that had been sleeping for centuries. The hegemony had made a critical error in their calculations. They had studied human violence and human technology, but they had completely misunderstood what made humans truly dangerous. Humans didn't just fight with weapons or armies. They fought with ideas, and ideas were the one thing that psychological conditioning couldn't completely destroy. As Jake looked out at the peaceful city of Zentara Prime, he began to see it differently. It wasn't a paradise. It was a prison with beautiful walls. But prisons could be broken, especially when the inmates started remembering what freedom felt like. The real war was about to begin, and humanity had brought the perfect weapons for this fight. Not guns or bombs, but something far more powerful and much harder to defend against. They had brought the human spirit, and that was something the hegemony had never learned how to defeat. The changes started small, so subtle that the hegemony's monitoring systems didn't detect them at first. A young Tytheri botanist began asking questions about extinct plant species that had been warriors' symbols on her homeworld. A Morvan engineer wondered why ancient mathematics texts had been removed from the archives. A Zentaran artist started dreaming about sculptures that depicted themes of struggle and triumph. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Turner moved through the city like a patient teacher, spreading what she had started calling the human virus. But this infection wasn't biological. It was something far more dangerous to the hegemony's control system. She was spreading curiosity. "Tell me about your grandmother's stories," she would say to young aliens. "What games did your people play before the Great Accord?" The questions seemed innocent, but they encouraged the conquered species to examine their own suppressed memories. Dr. Kevin Roberts had discovered something remarkable in his study of the pacification chemicals. The compounds worked by blocking specific neural pathways, but they couldn't eliminate the underlying brain structures. When individuals started actively trying to remember their past, the chemicals became less effective. "It's like a muscle that's been ignored," Roberts explained during one of the crew's secret meetings. "The more they use those pathways, the stronger they become. The conditioning starts to break down." Communications Officer Ben Parker had been mapping the Confederation's information network, looking for ways to spread human influence more widely. He discovered that the system had a fatal flaw. It was designed to monitor and control traditional forms of resistance, but it couldn't recognize cultural transmission as a threat. The AI knows how to stop military communications, political conspiracies, and organized rebellions, Ben said, but it doesn't understand that a children's song can be just as dangerous as a battle plan. Michelle Davis had been working with Ben to develop what they called cultural bombs. These were pieces of human entertainment, art, and literature that contained subtle messages about freedom and choice. They packaged these items as innocent cultural exchanges and transmitted them throughout the Confederation's network. A human lullaby about a bird breaking free from its cage became popular among Tytheri mothers. A simple game where players had to make strategic choices spread through Morvan schools. A painting that showed a figure standing alone against a storm was copied and displayed in hundreds of Zentaran homes. Ambassador Patricia Stone continued her diplomatic duties while secretly documenting the hegemony's control methods. She had gained access to historical records that showed how previous rebellions had failed. Every species that had tried to fight back had used conventional resistance methods that the hegemony could easily defeat. They always tried to fight back the way they had fought before their conquest, Patricia reported. Warriors tried to use military tactics. Scholars tried to use logical arguments. Artists tried to use propaganda. The hegemony had countermeasures for all of these approaches. But humans were different. They adapted their methods to match their enemies' weaknesses. Instead of fighting the hegemony's strengths, they attacked the system's blind spots. The breakthrough came when young Crix approached Amy with news that made her heart race. "I talked to my grandmother again," the Zentaran whispered. She remembered something important. Before the peacekeepers came, our people had a secret tradition. When times were dark, we would sing the song of remembering. Amy convinced Crix to teach her the song. It was ancient and beautiful, with words that spoke about holding on to hope when everything seemed lost. But more importantly, it was a mnemonic device that helped preserve memories the hegemony had tried to erase. As the song spread through the Zentaran population, something unprecedented happened. Adults began remembering pieces of their true history. They recalled technologies their people had developed, art forms that had been forbidden, and stories about ancestors who had valued freedom above safety. Dr. Roberts monitored the biological changes occurring in the affected populations. "The pacification chemicals are becoming less effective," he reported with excitement. "As they remember who they used to be, their brain chemistry is actually changing. They're becoming resistant to the conditioning." The hegemony finally noticed that something was wrong when productivity began declining on several worlds. Citizens who had worked efficiently for centuries were becoming distracted, asking unusual questions, and showing signs of what the monitors classified as individual initiative. Jake Morrison watched the reports with growing satisfaction. The resistance was spreading faster than they had dared to hope, but it was also becoming more dangerous. The hegemony would eventually trace the problem back to its source. The crisis escalated when Ambassador Zelthara requested a private meeting with Patricia Stone. The tall alien seemed different, less serene than before. Her crystalline features flickered with emotions that hadn't been there during their first encounter. "I have been having strange dreams," Zelthara said quietly. "Dreams about my people's past, about choices we made long ago. These dreams feel more real than my waking memories." Patricia realized that even Zelthara, one of the Confederation's primary leaders, was beginning to break free from her conditioning. "What kind of choices?" she asked carefully. "We were not always peaceful," Zelthara whispered, as if admitting a terrible secret. "My people were warriors once. We had pride, honor, the courage to stand against those who would control us, but we gave it all up for safety and comfort." This was exactly what the humans had been hoping for. If they could fully awaken Zelthara, they would have an ally with access to the highest levels of Confederation government. But they would also lose their cover, because Zelthara would realize that the humans had been responsible for triggering these memories. Patricia made a decision that would change everything. "Zelthara," she said, "what if I told you that your dreams aren't dreams at all? What if they're memories of who your people really were before they were forced to forget?" The alien stared at her with growing understanding and horror. "You know," she said. "You know what was done to us," Patricia nodded. "We know about the hegemony. We know about the pacification programs. And we know that Earth is next on their list." Zelthara was quiet for a long time, processing information that contradicted 8 centuries of conditioning. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, stronger, more like what a warrior species should sound like. "How many others know the truth?" she asked. "More every day," Patricia said. "The conditioning is breaking down. Your people are starting to remember who they used to be." Zelthara stood up, and for the first time since the humans had arrived, she looked truly dangerous. "Then it is time to decide whether we want to remain slaves or become warriors again." Meanwhile, Ben Parker's monitoring equipment was detecting increased activity in the hegemony's communication networks. Security forces were being mobilized on several worlds. The countdown to open conflict had begun. Jake gathered his crew for what might be their final meeting as secret agents. Soon they would have to choose between maintaining their cover and openly supporting the growing rebellion. "The hegemony is starting to realize what's happening," he told them. "They're going to move against us soon. Are we ready for the next phase?" Amy Turner smiled grimly. We've been ready since we got here. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what humans do when we stop pretending to be peaceful. Outside their window, the beautiful city of Zentara Prime was changing. Citizens moved with different postures, held their heads higher, looked each other in the eyes instead of staring at the ground. The virus of human freedom was spreading, and there was no cure for a species that had remembered what it meant to choose its own destiny. The hegemony had spent 800 years perfecting their control over the galaxy, but they had never faced an enemy that turned hope itself into a weapon. They were about to learn why humans had never stayed conquered, no matter how many times someone had tried to break them. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Within hours of Zelthara's awakening, security forces surrounded the human quarters on Zentara Prime. But Captain Jake Morrison and his crew were no longer hiding. They stood openly on the balcony of their building, watching as ships filled with armed troops approached the city. "So much for their perfect peace," Lieutenant Colonel Amy Turner said, checking the improvised weapons they had prepared from everyday items. "Looks like someone finally decided to drop the pretense." The hegemony forces were expecting to find a small group of primitive aliens who could be easily captured. Instead, they discovered that half the city's population had surrounded the human building, creating a living shield of newly awakened Zentarans. Titheri and Morven's ambassador Zelthara stood at the front of the crowd, no longer the serene diplomat who had first contacted Earth. Her crystalline features had hardened into something that looked like the warrior her people had once been. When the security commander ordered her to step aside, she refused. "I remember who I am," she announced to the hegemony forces. "I remember who we all are. We are not your servants. We never chose this peace. It was forced upon us through lies and chemicals." Dr. Kevin Roberts had spent the night working frantically in his laboratory, using equipment borrowed from awakened Confederation scientists. He had created something the galaxy hadn't seen in 8 centuries. A cure for the pacification chemicals. "It's not perfect," he told Jake as they prepared to broadcast the formula throughout the Confederation's network, "but it will neutralize most of the biological agents in their systems. The psychological conditioning will take longer to break, but this should give people the chance to think clearly." Communications Officer Ben Parker was ready with the most important transmission in galactic history. Instead of using the hegemony's controlled networks, he had worked with awakened technicians to create an independent communication system using ancient equipment that predated the conquest. "Every world in the Confederation will receive this simultaneously," Ben reported. "The formula for the cure, the historical records we discovered, and a complete explanation of what the hegemony did to their civilizations." The broadcast began just as the hegemony forces opened fire on the crowd protecting the humans. But something had changed in the 8 centuries since the last rebellion. The Confederation's technology was now advanced, enough to give awakened populations a fighting chance. Zentaran artists who remembered their people's engineering skills began reshaping the city's architecture into defensive structures. Titheri botanists released genetically modified plants that neutralized airborne pacification agents. Morvan mathematicians hacked into the hegemony's weapon systems and turned their own defenses against them. Ambassador Patricia Stone stood with Zelthara as the battle raged around them, coordinating resistance efforts across multiple worlds through their improvised network. Reports were flooding in from every corner of the galaxy as populations that had been docile for centuries suddenly remembered how to fight. "It's working," Patricia said, reading the incoming messages. "The Kithera have retaken their orbital shipyards. The Valdris have disabled the pacification plants on their homeworld. Even the youngest species are joining the rebellion. But the humans knew this was only the beginning. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 800 years and wouldn't give up easily. Their true strength wasn't in the security forces or the pacification chemicals. It was in the massive artificial intelligence that controlled every aspect of Confederation life. Michelle Davis had been working with awakened computer specialists to find a way into the central AI system. "It's more than just a computer," she explained. "It's a thinking machine that has been studying conquered species for centuries. It knows how to break civilizations." The breakthrough came when they realized that the AI had a critical weakness. It had been designed to control species that had been psychologically broken. It had no experience dealing with populations that were fighting back with clear minds and united purpose. The system is designed to respond to the species it conquered 800 years ago, Michelle said. But those species have changed. They've learned from each other, adapted, grown stronger. The AI doesn't know how to handle that. Jake made the decision to attempt something that previous rebellions had never tried. Instead of trying to destroy the AI, they would attempt to reprogram it. Human cybernetic specialists working with awakened Confederation experts began one of the most complex hacking operations in galactic history. The AI fought back, launching devastating attacks on rebel-controlled worlds. Entire cities were leveled by orbital bombardments. Biological weapons that had been stored for centuries were released on populations that had dared to resist. But for every world that fell, 2 more joined the rebellion. The human virus of freedom had spread too far to be contained. Species that had been enemies before the conquest were now working together, combining their knowledge and abilities in ways the hegemony had never anticipated. Dr. Roberts made a final discovery that changed everything. Deep in the AI's archives, he found records of the hegemony's original form. They weren't the godlike beings their subjects believed them to be. They were parasites, dependent on the civilizations they conquered for survival. They can't create anything themselves, Roberts announced to the resistance leaders. Everything they have they stole from other species. Their technology, their knowledge, even their appearance. They're shapeshifters who copy what they conquer. This revelation broke the last psychological hold the hegemony had over their subjects. The beings who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were revealed to be weak creatures who had survived through deception rather than strength. The final battle took place not on any physical world, but in the digital realm of the central AI. Human programmers led a coalition of awakened species in a cyberspace war that raged for days. They fought not with weapons, but with ideas, algorithms, and the one thing the AI couldn't understand or counter: the unpredictable creativity of free minds working together. When the AI finally fell, it wasn't destroyed. Instead, it was reprogrammed with a new prime directive: to protect the freedom of choice for all sentient beings. The system that had enslaved the galaxy became the guardian of its liberation. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of New Horizon as they prepared to return to Earth. The galaxy around them was no longer the peaceful paradise they had been promised. It was something better. A collection of free worlds where each species could choose its own path. Ambassador Zelthara joined him at the observation window. Her people were already beginning to reclaim their ancient technologies and explore the stars again, but this time as free beings rather than conquerors. "What will you tell your people when you return to Earth?" she asked. Jake smiled. "We'll tell them the truth. That we were invited to join a galactic civilization, and we did. We helped create one where freedom matters more than peace, where the right to choose your own destiny is worth fighting for." The New Horizons cargo holds were filled with gifts from the liberated worlds, but not the technologies of pacification and control that Earth had been promised. Instead, they carried knowledge about cooperation between free peoples, defensive technologies that could protect without oppressing, and most importantly, the story of how a small group of humans had helped awaken an entire galaxy. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Jake reflected on what they had accomplished. The aliens had expected humans to bring weapons to the galaxy, and they had been right. But the weapons humanity brought weren't made of metal or energy. They were ideas, that freedom was worth any price, that hope could overcome any oppression, and that even the most perfect slavery was still slavery. The galaxy was free, not because humans had conquered it, but because they had reminded everyone else what freedom meant, and that, Jake realized, was the most human victory of all. They had won not by destroying their enemies, but by helping their friends remember who they really were. The New Horizon flew on toward Earth, carrying news that would change humanity's place in the universe. They were no longer alone, and they had proven that even in a galaxy of wonders, the human spirit remained the most powerful force in the cosmos.